I will take and I will add the URL for the Howland Society to the website at the bottom of this video, and people can contact and make reservations.
Great.
Now, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say you own a sailboat. The society owns a sailboat.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Sure. What it is a sailboat,
Okay.
and it's the type of boat is called a shallop.
Shallop.
A shallop is a very typical 17th century work vessel designed to do a lot of different things. The Pilgrims had a shallop that they brought with them on the Mayflower,
Right.
stowed in pieces below decks. The shallop that we own, I actually built while I worked for Plymouth Plantation, myself and a crew of about 6 people. Right. We built it for the John Howland Society.
Okay.
The idea at the time was to recreate a trading voyage that John Howland undertook from Plymouth up the coast to the Kennebec River, then up the Kennebec to where Augusta is today.
Now, considering the fact we're down by the Cape Cod Canal, and the Kennebec River is way up in Maine, passing Gloucester, Marblehead, Newburyport, New Hampshire, Portsmouth,
Right.
Portland, way up there. That's quite a distance today in any boat. Never mind back in the 1600s in a sailboat that wasn't really designed for speed or comfort.
Right. So a shallop, as I said, is a workboat,
Right.
And what this shallop represents is one that the Pilgrims had built by a boat builder here in the colony, 1623. So they had the shallop from the Mayflower, and then this boat builder built 2 more shallops.
Okay.
2 years later, a house carpenter who had worked with the boat builder, they needed a larger boat to get to Maine. So they cut one of those shallops in half, lengthened it about 5 feet, and put a deck on it. And they used that boat as a coastal trading vessel to travel up to Maine. And yes, it was a long ways, and yes, it's not as comfortable as we recognize today, but for the Pilgrims, they had tried this voyage in an open shallop, like the Mayflower shallop, but found it unsafe for themselves and for their cargo of corn that was getting ruined by the salt water. So they needed a decked over vessel. Their original plan, you may know, was to have a second vessel with them come with the Mayflower, the Speedwell. Speedwell was not able to make the Atlantic crossing, so they were without a smaller coastal vessel for their colony. So they tried various ways to get around that problem, and one of them was this shallop that a reproduction of which we own today.
Okay. Now that is out on a mooring right off State Pier. What do you do with that? Besides leave it on a mooring?
Essentially, we use it to help tell the John Howland and Elizabeth Tillie story.
So it comes in, it gets tied up to the...
Yeah, like just recently, we were part of the Plymouth 400 Maritime Festival weekend.
Yep.
We were tied up to the float, actually right next to the Mayflower shallop.
Yep.
And visitors would come aboard, and we could show them the vessel and talk about colonial history and John Howland history.
Okay. And who's that boat named after?
Elizabeth Tillie, John Howland's wife.
John Howland's wife, Elizabeth Tillie, and she was one of the... Is she the first one that was supposed to have stepped ashore?
They say it was Mary Chilton.
It was Mary Chilton, okay.
But we don't really know for sure.
She's the one buried at King's Chapel,
right,
in Boston.
Elizabeth was a young girl, 13 years old, during the Atlantic crossing of the Mayflower. She came with her mother and her father and her aunt and her uncle.
Yep.
They were part of the Leiden congregation and part of the Separatist Church. During the winter, half the passengers died, including all 4 of the adults with Elizabeth. Elizabeth was alone then in the New World. She was put into the household of John Carver, the governor of the colony, where John Howland was an indentured servant.
Right.
3 years later, John Howland and Elizabeth Tillie married, and ultimately, as I said, had 10 children.
Wow. Now, I should have addressed this earlier, but better late than never, I guess. John Howland has a tremendous story. He almost never made it.
That's right.
What?
Yeah, John Howland famously, we have visitors all the time come to the house who know something about John Howland, and the one thing they often know is that he fell off the Mayflower during the Atlantic crossing. William Bradford, who wrote of Plymouth Plantation, records in his journal that a lusty young man named John Howland came up on deck in a storm and was thrown off the ship with a great seal of the ship. That is, when the ship heeled over sharply, he was thrown off the side and was saved only by grabbing hold of a line he called topsail halyard, and was dragged up back on board by sailors. So he was saved from certainly drowning by this line that happened to have washed over the side,
Right.
And he was able to grab it and come back up on board.
Thankfully, whoever was manning that line didn't stow it properly.
I can
And it
imagine
went over the
in a
side.
big storm that a lot of those coils of lines
Of
were
course.
washed off the
Right.
side.
Absolutely.
And people were not on deck.
That is quite the story. And you've been on sailboats before.
Sure.
And I've been thrown off of sailboats in racing situations, and you kind of get panicked and disoriented.
Right.
I can only imagine. It's not like they had deck lights.
Right.
It was totally black.
Yeah.
Maybe a moon.
Yeah, and his arm must have hit that line, and he grabbed a hold of it and wouldn't let go.
Right.
So he was brought back up on board. Interestingly, Bradford tells that. He doesn't tell a lot of stories about the Atlantic crossing, but he tells that story, and we think Bradford tells that story because he uses it as an example of how God was showing favor on the colonists.
Right.
That John Howland was turned into or became an important part of the colony's success. And so he was saved from drowning so that he could continue on to be a success for the colony.
Some of the stories that Bradford didn't tell might be best forgotten. You know what I mean? You'd rather, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Okay. All right. Peter, thank you very much. Anything you want to tell the watchers, the listeners about the story?
Just come visit the house.
Yep.
And we also own land over at
That's
Kingston
right. Thank
called
you.
Rocky Nook.
Rocky Nook.
Rocky Nook was the place where John Howland and Elizabeth Tillie lived. It's now in the town of Kingston. It was part of the Plymouth colony, of course, early on. They owned about 80 acres and had a thriving farm there. We own about 40 acres, half of which was part of John and Elizabeth's farm. And if you go there today, you can see the site where their house was. Archaeology studies have been done and have found the foundation of the house.
Really?
The hearth. There's a layout of one of the barns that was associated with it.
Is the layout over there?
Yes.
Because I have friends that live in there, and I'm down Howland Lane all the time.
Yep.
And on the left you see the marker for Joseph,
Yes, that's right.
and on the right is John.
Right.
And
So if you get out of your car and go up the hill, there's a little kiosk at the top of the hill with some maps to orient you to what you're looking at. You can see the foundation. If you're looking down, they know where the spring is, where they got their water for their everyday use. There's a barn there. They've been doing archaeology out there. We have been doing archaeology out there for many years, since the 1930s, and have thousands of artifacts recovered from that site.
I was just down there last week visiting a friend, and you see the monuments, but I never thought there was anything but those monuments. Now that I know,
Yeah.
I'll stop in and take a walk up that hill, and
Though that's a place where pilgrims, we know, that's where they lived.
that's what
Elizabeth likely lived in this house after John died. John died in 1672, she was alone after that. She probably came and lived here in Plymouth for a while with Jabez and Bethiah. But ultimately, we know Elizabeth moved down to Swansea with her daughter Lydia, who had moved there with her family. And so Elizabeth lived the remainder of her life with Lydia and is buried in East Providence.
Right. That was another interesting thing. Pilgrims didn't always stay here downtown on Court
That's right.
Street.
No, that's
They
right.
moved off considerably
Yeah, pretty quickly.
to Rhode Island.
That's right.
Yeah. Up
Jabez
north.
and Bethiah moved to Rhode Island.
Did they?
Middleborough, the Cape, of
Right.
course. So they were quickly spreading out.
Dispersed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the causes of the King Philip's War, was English
Encroachment.
pressure on land.
Really? Yeah. That's interesting. Now, there's some development going on over there in the Nook, that land. What's the
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it. I know it's land that is adjacent to our property that
Yeah.
was sold, I want to say 7 acres, And the idea the developers have is to build a number of condominiums on it.
That's not your land.
No, it's definitely
Definitely not.
It's adjacent to ours, though.
Okay. Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've learned things about the society and the shallop and lots of other topics.
Good.
Anyways, thank you very much for taking some time.
Thank you.